for this trap shit. Sergeant Smack make it backflip. Telly Hank it with the action. With the Vato speaking Spanish. Frank Matthews, how I vanish. Poof. Came back like I'm King Tut. Gold BBS is on a beamer. When Fat Cat was 10 queens up. Ball off the profit, not the re-up. Fly like Puerto Rican Jesus. Uptown like I'm Baby Maine. Just caught a touchdown from the Bay.
Where they were going and who they were targeting. He was given a fresh start that came to a tragic end. You could just walk right in the building. It was completely preventable.
On a Monday night in mid-January 2017, two masked armed gunmen would burst into a federal halfway house in Saginaw, Michigan. Of the roughly 20 witnesses at the facility, they would say the men seemed to know exactly who they was looking for. The deadly chain of events would all be put in motion by a presidential pardon just 2 months prior.
Over the last few years, a lot of people have become aware of the inequities in the criminal justice system. The fact that we spend over $80 billion a year in incarcerating people, oftentimes who've only been engaged in nonviolent drug offenses. Right now, with our overall crime rate and incarceration rate both falling, we're at a moment when some good people in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, and folks all across the country are coming together around ideas to make the system work smarter, make it work better. And I'm determined to do my part wherever I can. That's one of the reasons why I'm commuting the sentences of 46 prisoners who were convicted many years or in some cases decades ago. These men and women were not hardened criminals, but the overwhelming majority had been sentenced to at least 20 years. 14 of them had been sentenced to life for nonviolent drug offenses. So their punishments didn't fit the crime. And if they'd been sentenced under today's laws, nearly all of them would have already served their time. I've made clear to them that re-entering society is going to require responsibility on their part, and hard work, and smarter choices.
Born and raised on Saginaw's south side, DeMarlon Thomas's early life would be in the city dealing with urban decay and economic hardship. The city of Saginaw, at one time a thriving industrial hub driven by its manufacturing sector, had fallen on hard times, just as the city of Detroit had, as factories closed and jobs disappeared and the population would dwindle. The effects of the industry leaving would leave behind a landscape scarred by abandoned buildings and neglected infrastructure, symptomatic of a community in decline. With the employment rate higher than average and opportunities dwindling, it would leave a lot of youth in Saginaw facing an uncertain future. In the vacuum left by economic devastation, gangs would be able to thrive. Through the allure of the streets, many young people, DeMarlon included, sought belonging and purposes in the ranks of organizations like the Sunnyside Gang. Now, when you think of crime in Michigan, I'm sure the first thing that comes to mind is Detroit or probably even Flint. But by the mid-2000s, after seeing the homicide numbers in Saginaw hit a 30-plus year low in 1999, it would double just 3 years later, by 2002. Authorities would link that spike in violence to two relatively new violent gangs, the Sunnyside Gang, which occupied the city's south side, and the Northside Gang, which claimed the city's northeast side and the former Daniel Heights neighborhood. By 2004, the gang violence would spread to the city's Old Town district, where a quintuple shooting would take the life of one man inside the Captain Cove's bar on North Niagara. The homicide total would soar to 25 in 2004, the city's highest rate since one of the most deadly times in 1993.
Michigan neighborhoods topping a new list of America's most dangerous neighborhoods. Police telling us today they're doing the best they can to get mid-Michigan off lists like these. NBC 25's Walter Smith Randolph joining us in the studio with what neighbors are saying about all this. Walter?
Bill, neighbors are very skeptical about Neighborhood Scout's new list. They say while crime might be high in some areas, they don't think Flint and Saginaw should be in the top 25. Also topping the list, Saginaw's east side near Genesee and Holland Avenues, coming in 10th on Neighborhood Scout's list.
It's an interesting stat.
Saginaw police say they're working to keep crime stats stable.
Taking a proactive step and proactive measures is rather difficult at this time, but we are doing the best that we can. Our response times are good.
Both Flint and Saginaw police using new strategies with the Michigan State Police to fight crime.
By bringing our guys in and working together and putting all our resources together, it definitely helps us to be able to do a better job.
Roberts says numbers are tough to argue against, but he's seeing an improvement.
Much better, yeah.
Now, this one is going to hit at the heart just a little bit. What up? This is Popalot. Now, y'all know what they say about wrong place, wrong time? Well, let me tell y'all a story. So, during his early years, DeMarlon was really able to dodge the bullshit that would come with the streets due to sports, particularly football, with his mother still being in high school and extremely young when she had him. He would end up spending a lot of time at his grandmother, Willie Jane Thomas's house. Now, with him standing out in football during high school, he would end up getting a scholarship to a Division III community college in Minnesota. Now, I'm not sure if it was the book side of things, the competition on the field, or him just missing home, but that wouldn't last a year, as his mother would state that she would start getting calls from him asking her to pick him up, explaining to her that school just wasn't his thing. His mother being a substitute teacher and knowing exactly how hard it was to make it, she would beg her only son to stay in school and take advantage of the opportunity that was in front of him. Now, her telling him that, I'm sure, had a lot to do with more than just education, as by that time, Saginaw's violent crime rate was one of the highest in the entire nation. But I'm guessing with his mind made up, he would eventually end up back on the south side of Saginaw, back at his grandmother's house. And without football to occupy him while he was back at home, he would begin hanging out with some of the kids that he grew up with, who one media publication would describe as kids who looked out for one another in a violence-plagued city. At some time, the group would end up taking on the name Sunnyside from the neighborhood that they would reside in. And it would be a year from when DeMarlon was on the field to where he would get in the field, ending up with him being convicted of selling 0.8 of an ounce of crack cocaine and being put on probation. He would have that probation extended from the court when just months from that first conviction, he would be caught negotiating a $20 sale of crack. Unfortunately for DeMarlon, by this time, the FBI, the ATF, state troopers, and local police were in the midst of a 3-year investigation of the Sunnyside gang, and they wouldn't look at the group as a bunch of kids just looking out for each other. And in 2007, 17 members of the group, including DeMarlon, would end up being indicted. Now, I'm sure him looking at the Fed's conviction rate and probably even more that time that he could potentially get taking his case to trial, he would end up pleading guilty to distributing a 1/4 ounce of crack, leading to the most unfortunate thing for DeMarlon, because at that time, with the laws that were passed in the 1980s, in part due to the quote-unquote war on drugs, that would eventually lead to long sentences for people that they looked at as career offenders or career criminals, people that they looked at as the biggest felons, handing them down football numbers to try to take them off the streets as long as possible. And reviewing DeMarlon's record, looking at his 2 previous state convictions, the judge in his case would look at him as one of those people and label him a career offender. Now, his defense attorney at the time, Amy Grace Gerhardt, would attempt to make an argument with the judge that there was nothing in the indictment to indicate that DeMarlon Thomas was anything more than a small-time street-level seller, going even further, saying that the Federal Sentencing Commission had concluded that applying career offender statuses to low-level dealers had a disproportionate effect on black defendants. His judge wouldn't be persuaded, and his lawyer would eventually have to tell him that he was potentially looking at 22 years in prison. He would end up being sentenced to 19, and I'm sure crushed he would have no choice but to man up and take the sentence. Locked up, he would keep some faith, as some of the mentors that he had in prison would start to tell him about a program where President Barack Obama was soliciting applications from nonviolent offenders for clemency. And just before Thanksgiving on 2016, with 8 years served and looking at 11 more to go, he would get the news that he would get a second chance on life when him and 77 other inmates had their sentences commuted by President Obama. And on December 13th, 2016, at the age of 31, DeMarlon Thomas, with the rest of his life ahead of him, was moved to a federal halfway house in his hometown of Saginaw, Michigan, where he would be allowed out several hours of the day as part of his reintegration into society. Though he had his freedom back, some people close to DeMarlon would say how he felt uneasy about the location of the halfway house, which happened to be on the north side of the city, a place that at one time was a stronghold to the Sunnyside crew's most fierce rivals. But aside from all of that, the people that was close to him would really explain how he was just happy to be home and ready to enjoy his life after being locked up for so long. But on January 23rd, 2016, in less than 6 weeks after having his sentence commuted and gaining a new lease on life, 2 masked gunmen carrying semi-automatic rifles would burst into the halfway house through an unsecured door. One of the gunmen was said to hold inmates and employees inside of the facility at gunpoint, while the other scoured through rooms, apparently looking for DeMarlon Thomas. Now, when he eventually found him, he would be shot multiple times at close range and executed. Now, turning a tragic story to heartbreaking, after hearing about DeMarlon's death and after already being ill, his grandmother, Willie Jane, had completely stopped eating and refused taking her medicine. She would end up passing away on March 19th, 2016, just 3 days before DeMarlon was scheduled to get out the halfway house and really become a free man. Now, in an investigation that I'm assuming immediately turns federal, with it occurring at a federal halfway house, authorities still hadn't made any arrest in the slaying of DeMarlon Thomas. Now, the question I have of y'all that might have knowledge to the subject was, is this a federal crime, being that it happened at a federal halfway house? And besides that, with an ending that usually comes to somebody that snitched, how do y'all explain getting a presidential clemency and then being involved in a hit that sound like it came out of a mafia movie? Now, I definitely need y'all downstairs in the comments below and let me know y'all take on the situation, because this one threw me. If y'all was in the city of Saginaw during this time, y'all definitely get down there too. We definitely want to hear what y'all talking about. And y'all just run it up down there. Y'all let me know what cities we need to go to, what stories we need to tell, what we missed, what we got wrong, all of that. Y'all tapping with me directly on Instagram, Twitter, POP_A_LOT. And until the next play, y'all know how we rocking. Shades Popalot. Salute the almighty mob.